Muted.
Before we get started, I want to remind you that you do not have to be a member of Next Century Cities to apply for this award. However, if you are interested in membership, please contact me, deb@nextcenturycities.org. We work with cities that have or hope to have fast, affordable, reliable broadband. We're 134 cities and counties strong. We represent rural, suburban, and urban communities, and currently our communities represent 27 million Americans. So a few housekeeping details for this call. To reduce ambient noise, we ask that everyone remain muted for the duration of the call. We highly encourage your participation, however, so please do send questions and comments via the chat box on the right of your screen. You can send the questions to the group as a whole or to just one of the organizers or just to the organizers. We will be sure to share your question. The URL for the application will be on the slide, but to make it easier, we're also going to send it out to everyone via the chat box. So on the call with me today is Todd O'Boyle, Deputy Director of Next Century Cities, who is coordinating the Next Generation Engagement Awards. Chris Mitchell, the Policy Director for Next Century Cities and the Director of Community Broadband Networks Initiative at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I'm Deb Sosha, and I'm the Executive Director of Next Century Cities. I'm going to hand it over to Todd to get us started.
Thanks, Deb, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'll start by saying, when we first conceived of these awards, we wanted to address a specific issue, and that is that communities, including many NCC members, nationwide are getting creative to connect their communities. And we know all the stories, you guys as members know them better than anyone, about how innovative our members are on creating public-private partnerships and working together on a local level to get better broadband out. But one area that one thing we noticed is that communities are often focused on the economic or community development impacts of broadband, and those are real. And to be sure, we care about economic and community development. But what about civic development on a local level? How can tech-powered civic engagement transform communities? We want to answer that question, and that's why we're launching the Next Generation Engagement Awards, a program to reward innovative thinking on tech-powered civic engagement. We unveiled the Next Generation Engagement Awards recently at the Broadband Community Summit in Austin. Already, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Right now, we're taking applications, and we hope that today's webinar will spread some of our infectious enthusiasm for the awards. So, please do apply. I want to begin by turning to our Policy Director, Chris Mitchell. Chris, can you say a few words about Next Generation, the Next Generation Engagement Awards and some exciting things that you see on the horizon?
Absolutely. Very happy to do that. You know, for me, this is exciting because I've long been focused on how to improve infrastructure, and I'm very excited about how the role that infrastructure plays in our lives. But one of the things we've found is that in every city that has improved their networks, you know, by investing in their own networks or partnering or doing whatever their strategy is, I think a lot of times they think there will be a point at which, you know, they're sort of done. But we've yet to find that point. And one of the common challenges comes once the network is deployed is figuring out how to make sure you're getting the most benefit for the community out of it. You know, it's one thing to try and attract jobs, and that's often the first target. But one of the things that I care most about is making sure we have a good civic space and, you know, people that are engaged in their democracy, and that we're able to take advantage of modern technology to really improve everyone's life. And I think a big part of that is getting people engaged. And so I think of this issue of using technology to benefit people, to get people more involved in their local government, in their communities, is really the challenge of our time. You know, just expanding internet access alone is not the challenge. It is a challenge, but we're expanding internet access so that people can do something with it. And that's where I think this award is really terrific, because it'll give a reason to cities to really try to amp up this sort of thought and to try and make sure that they're thinking along these lines, and what can happen when there's ubiquitous, high-quality connections. You know, what can you do to really improve the community? So I just think it's one of those things. A lot of people are thinking about, what's next in terms of getting the infrastructure out. But we can't forget that our fundamental end goal is to make sure that everyone's benefiting from these networks, and that's both what Next Century Cities is all about, and I think what these awards are about.
That's great, Chris. I'm wondering, there's some exciting work going on in some of our member communities like Spanish Fork. Can you say a few words on that?
Sure. Yeah. One of the great stories that I think was inspiring to me in talking with Spanish Fork over the years is that they do a good job of broadcasting all their public meetings. And they're a community that's small enough that when people would see something that was happening on their TV on a public meeting, they would sometimes get in the car and go down and join the meeting to get their public comments in. And that's something that I think is inspiring, and that's sort of the goal of broadcasting those meetings. But we can hope that the next generation of technology would allow people to both monitor public meetings real time and then perhaps even contribute, whether that is substantially by making comments or perhaps even just having simple yes/no votes or sort of a sense of the room. There's a lot of different ways one can find, I think, to make it easier for people to participate in those local meetings, which tend not to be very sexy, but are often where so many important decisions get made. And then, one other community is Louisville, which I think is really focusing on some of the lower income areas of town. And this is more of a nuts and bolts kind of thing, where they have a wireless mesh network, and they're trying to figure out how to improve city services in that community. In those neighborhoods, whether it's trash collection or whether it's making sure that an unoccupied house has a detector in it, so if there's a fire or a problem, the authorities can respond more rapidly and make sure it doesn't impact the neighbors and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of potential here. There's a wide range of ideas, and I'm really hoping we see people that are experimenting with lots of different ideas in terms of how to use these networks to really to produce more public engagement.
Those are all really compelling ideas, and I sure like the idea of making council meetings more interactive. Chris, you hit the nail on the head when you said that they're not always the most glamorous meetings. They're also not the most well-attended meetings, and so the inputs they're getting are not always representative of the community at large. They may only represent a handful of interests that have business before the council, and so anything we can do to grow the involvement is exciting and promising, and I think that's something we're really looking for here with the Next Generation Engagement Awards. Is how can we take existing programming or programming that's been contemplated but never enacted and use technology to transform it and lift it to a new level. So I'll pivot now back to Deb. Deb, your hometown, Boston, is perennially at the center of the conversation on civic engagement. One program there that I've always found to be really compelling is the Youth Lead the Change participatory budgeting program. I think it's fascinating. Can you spend a few minutes just talking about it and how it works and what the youth there do?
Sure. It's a very cool project. The teams are challenged to share the ideas they have that would help to improve their city. So they're really generating the ideas. Others can generate them as well, but ideas are generated predominantly by the teams. The city sets aside $1 million, and only youth can vote on which submission gets selected. So the ideas vary from things like graffiti walls to community garden to better lighting. One interesting idea was to have recycling machines at the T stations, their subway stations, so folks can put in cans and bottles and get money put on their Charlie card as a way to reduce waste and litter in the city. I thought that was pretty interesting. So there's a whole process for having the youth develop the proposals. Those proposals are posted. Youth participate in a vote on the projects they think are most important, and their selection is actually binding. So participatory democracy, but with the youth in charge.
I think the most exciting thing about that is on the one hand, it's exciting to involve people in budgeting. Participatory budgeting is a compelling phenomenon. But what's even more compelling is that this isn't just giving people a say, it's giving people a real decisive role in determining how that part of the budget is allocated. It devolves ownership and devolves decision-making authority to the individuals, and in this particular case, the youth. So the youth are really getting a greater ownership stake in the community that they're a part of. You know, the more I learn about it, the more excited I get. So I think, you know, there's so many other areas that we could focus on. You know, there are many different ways that communities can get involved. There are many different ways that, you know, that communities can take programs that, you know, they've been contemplating. I think if you ask any city-level staffer, if you could change one thing about your community, if you could just have a little bit of an infusion of resources and technical support, what would you be able to do? And almost every city-level staffer I've met has a short list or a punch list of things that, you know, would be just really great if only we could find a little bit of resources. So a follow-up question for Chris. You know, there's exciting work happening elsewhere. Can you share any, do you have any other exciting programs or thought-provoking ideas that you'd like to share?
Well, you know, regarding the public meetings and
I'm sorry, maybe you could say a few more words about Louisville. If you could, you started to talk about that earlier. Could you dig in a little bit more?
Well, I think one of the, I mean, in my mind, one of the things that allows Louisville to experiment in these things is that they have this network available that is that they're building using unlicensed technology at a very low cost. You know, this is something that they are doing on a tight budget, and that's one of the things that I think is really inspiring is these low-cost solutions, which are often enabled by the unlicensed technologies. With Louisville, I think, you know, the fire detection is a tremendous one. That we had talked with them on our podcast, and they talked about that and the wireless trash compactors. But I actually think that, you know, one of the things that is really inspiring is trying to get kids more involved. And this one doesn't come out of Louisville, but the idea of apps that would make it more easy for kids to participate in understanding the budget. I think of gamification to some extent, and I think there's a lot of potential there. And it would be interesting, you know, I mean, just to throw out an idea, if one was walking around a city and could actually see, you know, how much of the city budget goes to the parks, how much of the city budget goes to, you know, different things based on where you are. So I don't know. I think there's a whole world of ideas, and this would combine sort of geolocation with the information that people don't always find. You know, but a person can wander around a city, seeing what's happening. You know, this is. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit tangled up. But based on where they are, learn more about the city. You know, questions they might not have even known that they had.
Yeah. I think, Chris, you really put it well. One of the reasons that we have gone out of our way not to over-determine the outcomes of Next Generation Engagement Awards is to allow folks to surprise us with innovative ideas, and that's what we're really here to reward. So, Deb, you know, these are several great ideas, and you and I have been thinking really broadly about the Next Generation Engagement Awards. We've discussed budgeting and inclusion, but what are some other areas communities should be thinking about applying for?
Well, it could be around, I mean, there are so many things, as Chris mentioned. It could be around things like voting, could be around census, something regarding public safety, maybe quality of life issues in the communities. It could be something regarding the community assets, the libraries and the schools. You know, it's arts and recreation. What we really wanted to be careful about was we didn't want to narrow that focus to the point where folks couldn't get creative. We're really looking for those opportunities that address a specific issue that the community itself addresses as a problem for that community. So, the ideas abound, and we really don't want to limit the city's creativity when it comes to proposing unique problems and unique and creative solutions.
And let me follow on a little bit. I was a little scattered in the last one, but one of the in some ways my brain was too crowded. I recommend that people who are interested in this space might look at responsive or the Responsive City, I think the name is, the Susan Crawford book she did with Goldsmith, in which she talks about a number of interesting things. And one of the things that blew my mind, and that I think we'll find, is that when people are engaged, they're more excited about getting involved. And it drives more. There's a circular movement in which it reinforces itself. And the example is, if people call 311 to say that they have a pothole outside and they feel like they're complaining or they're a burden, whereas in this, the research suggests that if they are using the SeeClickFix app, in which they are reporting it on their cell phone and they can monitor it, they feel like they're more part of the process and they're more likely to join. And I think that's really inspiring, this idea. And I never would have expected. Oh, thank you. Deb just put a link in the chat box. The Responsive City, and but I think there's so much room there. I wouldn't have necessarily assumed that an app like SeeClickFix would have that result. But it does, and I think there's a hunger from people to get more involved, and I'm excited to see how new technologies in coming years will lead to that.
Yeah, I just happened to have that book on my desk when you mentioned it, Chris, so there you go.
So let's cover a few application nuts and bolts. Let's go through now that we've generated some excitement, let's talk about what it takes to apply. Deb, we'll go through a couple of likely questions that I'm sure our audience members are poring over already. But first off, when are applications due?
They're open already now, and they are due on June 15th.
June 15th. Okay, so another question. We've talked about programming, but what actually can be, what can a city apply for? Does this have to be does it have to be a new program? Could it be an app? Could it be a web interface?
Actually, it could be any of the above. We wouldn't want it to necessarily go toward a project that's going to happen anyway. We would love to have it be something that will only happen because of this intervention. And we definitely think that getting information from the community that will help to define what the problem is that gets addressed, and then some community engagement in solving that problem, those are things that we think are important and will be weighted. And I think the other piece of that we've talked a lot about is what is the level of engagement we anticipate, and what kind of projects would we weight. We will have on our site, so at the end of the week, we'll have a set of criteria that will help you really define your proposal. But let me give you an example. So let's imagine you have a park in your city. There are different ways that information could be put on your site and engaged in with the city members, the community. So for example, you might put information, and that would be your hours and the location of your tennis courts, and I can look it up and I know where to go and when I can go. The next step might be engagement, allowing the community members to actually book the tennis court online in advance. And then the next level would be participation, and that would be soliciting public opinion on the quality of the Parks Department services through an online system, fostering meaningful conversation among diverse stakeholders. And then the highest level in our mind is ownership, where we empower community members to literally shape the future of the park facilities, maybe with like an online CAD software. And folks should feel free to apply regardless of the stage that you're in, but you should note that we will more heavily weight the ones that move toward ownership. In other words, the citizens' input actually changes the outcome.
And can I just jump in? Sorry, Todd.
Sure.
I think that it's worth noting that one of the goals of having a contest like this is to really encourage conversations that might not have happened otherwise, so that people in one part of the city might be able to have a little bit more ability to go to a different part of the city, or activists or whatever, to have different conversations and to say, look, we have this opportunity, we have to apply by June 15th, and just having this opportunity to win this contest and to get some assistance. The goal is to have new conversations, because we're empowering people that have ideas to give them a tool to go and talk to other people about with some urgency.
Perfect.
That's very well said, and I think if I could ad lib here for a moment, there's an undercurrent of sharing and exchange that cuts across the Next Generation Engagement Awards as we've conceived of them. So this brings us to a question that's come in. Deb, are projects open source, or can is the community going to be required to share the outcomes in the end?
We do anticipate that the communities will share that, and that it will be openly shared to other cities. And we imagine that, like many of the apps and web applications that folks have created in the past and shared openly, it could be more easily adopted by another city, who now can see how it worked in that city, adopt it and adapt it for their city, and really help the larger group of municipalities across the country.
And another couple of nuts and bolts. So Deb, what are communities applying for? What kind of, so winners,
Sure.
What can winners expect to receive?
So up to $30,000, so that can be part of your application processes. There are two sides to that. You need to put in the actual application and then fill out a budget application, and both of those need to be turned in for your application to be complete. And that the budget piece of it, up to $30,000 from Next Century Cities. You can also anticipate both policy support and technical support from us, and some assistance with project management. So in other words, we are deeply invested in this being successful, and we're going to help you make it happen.
That's right, and we anticipate announcing, applications are due, we said, June 15th, and we anticipate announcing winners later in the summer. And then we will work with you. I want to underscore this. We're not just offering financial support. We're going to work with you to make sure that these projects come to fruition in a successful manner.
And we'll award up to 3. And the other part of this is us doing some work to network those 3 communities so they actually can help one another as well. I think the other thing that I mentioned is that we do anticipate that the applicant will be a city person, but that doesn't mean that the city does this alone. We actually hope that the city will partner and collaborate with community organizations, with nonprofits, and or with other entities, maybe the libraries within their community, so that it is an effort, as Chris said, that includes a number of community stakeholders. So we hope that that will be part of it, and we also hope that the city will have some in-kind support, and we hope that you're able to find some philanthropic support as well, or other support financially to help make this successful. So we'll help with all of those things.
Great, and I'll also, again, the cross-cutting undercurrent of sharing, we want to be able to report out on all the good things that our awardees are getting done so that other communities can learn from them. So we want to be able to showcase these great things. Another question has come in. So if I see we had one via email. The questioner asks, if I'm jointly applying with a community nonprofit, does the money, so the city has to apply, but can the money go to, does it have to go to the city also, or can the money go to the nonprofit partner? Deb, would you like to answer that?
Sure. It is okay with us if the nonprofit partner is the recipient of the funds. That would be fine with us.
Yeah, we know that sometimes cities have some protocol issues that make it difficult for the city itself to receive the funds. So we want to make this as painless as possible on our applicants. Do we have, I think now would be a great time for us to turn to the audience for questions. Do we have any questions from our participants? You can feel free to use the chat box.
We haven't had any other questions beside those you have mentioned, but I think in the meantime, well, we'll give you a few seconds here. We've got folks online if you have any other questions. If after you look at the application process, if after you're working on your budget, you have other questions, make sure you email Todd. Mm-hmm. So do you want to give them your email, which I think is on the next slide?
Todd@nextcenturycities.org, and I promise to get back to you as quickly as I can. We have an FAQ page online, and as questions come in, we've been updating that to help people with more information. When people ask questions, we think, oh gosh, that might be a common question. Oh, I see a question has come in. Aaron asks, you've listed areas, you list examples of areas ripe for innovation, including participatory budget, public transportation, urban planning. Are we giving weight to the specific examples that we have listed, or are our communities restricted to the categories that we have mentioned on the webinar today? Deb?
Yeah, no, not at all restricted. In fact, we hesitated to mention specifics because we didn't want folks to feel constrained by our thinking. We think the best ideas are going to come from the community and from the city workers, from the folks who actually live and work and enjoy their quality of life in that community and understand where the problems are. So we really hope that you will be very creative.
Great question.
So we have another question from Virgil. If we're developing a software application, should we assume the software will be open source and made available for other communities to use and expand on? We actually do expect that it will be open source.
We do expect that. If you have a very specific question about which open source license, and there are many out there, I'd ask that you just direct that to me, and then we will dialogue about that.
And we have another question. Might a county be eligible for this, or is it strictly for an individual city? A county could also be eligible. So you can, we at Next Century Cities, we have city and county members. And as we were looking at this project, we saw it as a city or county event. Okay, I think we may have no other questions. Todd?
Well, these were all very good questions. We hope that we've helped share some of our infectious enthusiasm for the Next Generation Engagement Awards. We could not be more excited to kick these off, and we do encourage everyone to check out the information that's at nextcenturycities.org. And as a reminder, we will have our judging rubric available at the end of the week for folks to review as they formulate their applications. Again, feel free to reach out to me directly.
So we did get another question, and so, sorry to interrupt. When will the decisions be made?
Decisions are coming at the end of the summer.
So, and we will have that specific information on our website as well as soon as that decision is made. And we will keep you up to date via that vehicle. So keep going back to that page for any questions you might have. We will update the FAQs as we go along. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. I hope this is helpful. We really look forward to hearing from you all, and we look forward to finding the creative and innovative ideas that you have determined to be important for your communities. Thank you all.